Ethan Harrington, the brilliant yet enigmatic billionaire CEO of Harrington Enterprises, had made a habit of testing people. To him, trust wasn't something freely given. It was earned, measured, and calculated. That morning, as the crisp autumn breeze swept through the coastal town of Ashton Bay, Ethan found himself sitting alone in the corner of a small rustic cafe called Seaside Haven. The place was worlds away from the sleek glass towers he was used to, yet it held a warmth that couldn't be replicated in boardrooms or luxury lounges. Ethan sipped his black coffee, his sharp eyes scanning the modestly decorated space. The wooden tables had seen years of wear, adorned with scratches and carvings of initials from nameless lovers. A faint scent of sea salt mingled with the aroma of freshly baked pastries. The cafe was bustling with the sound of chatter and the occasional clinking of plates, but Ethan's focus zeroed in on a single person, the waitress. She was young, no older than her mid-20s, with tired eyes that hinted at long nights and early mornings. Her name tag read Lila, and her warm, if slightly forced smile gave away little of what was going on behind it. What intrigued Ethan the most, however, was her obvious pregnancy. Beneath the loose-fitting apron, her rounded belly showed she was in the later stages. Lila moved between tables with practiced efficiency, balancing trays and jotting down orders, while managing to offer each customer a kind word or a polite laugh. Ethan couldn't help but wonder what her story was. Why was she here, working tirelessly in such a condition? Did she have someone supporting her? He leaned back in his chair, observing her more closely. When she finally approached his table, she offered the same smile she had given to everyone else. "Good morning," she greeted, her tone pleasant but brisk. "What can I get for you?" Ethan studied her for a moment before responding. "Coffee, black, and whatever pastry you recommend." "Coming right up," she said, scribbling the order onto her notepad. As she turned to leave, Ethan stopped her. "Lila, right?" He gestured toward her name tag. She paused, clearly surprised. "Yes, that's me." "Have we met before?" Ethan shook his head. "No, just curious. How long have you worked here?" "Almost 2 years," she replied, her tone cautious. She shifted her weight slightly, as if standing still for too long was becoming uncomfortable. "Do you enjoy it?" Lila blinked, the question catching her off guard. "It's honest work," she said simply. "Pays the bills." Ethan nodded, though her answer left him with even more questions. She didn't linger, instead disappearing behind the counter to prepare his coffee. As Ethan waited, he couldn't shake the feeling that Lila's calm demeanor was a mask for something deeper. There was a quiet strength in her movements, but also a subtle fragility that intrigued him. When she returned, placing the coffee and a plate with a freshly baked croissant in front of him, Ethan decided to test her. He slid a crisp $100 bill across the table. "For the recommendation," he said casually. Lila glanced at the bill, her lips tightening. "That's very generous, but I can't accept it," she said, her tone firm but polite. "Why not?" She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "Because I didn't do anything to earn it." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're working hard, aren't you? Isn't that enough?" Lila shook her head, pushing the bill back toward him. "I appreciate the thought, but I'm just doing my job. Enjoy your meal." She walked away before he could argue further, leaving Ethan both impressed and puzzled. The test Ethan finished his coffee, his mind racing. There was something extraordinary about Lila, her integrity, her quiet determination. She wasn't like the people he usually encountered, those who fawned over his wealth or sought to gain something from him. He decided to take his experiment a step further. He deliberately left his wallet on the table, a sleek black leather piece embossed with his initials. Inside, it held more than just cash. It contained his ID, credit cards, and business contacts that any ambitious person would kill to have. Ethan stepped outside, pretending to check his phone while keeping a discreet eye on the cafe window. It didn't take long for Lila to notice the wallet. She paused mid-step, frowning as she picked it up. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at it. Then, with a resolute expression, she walked over to the cafe's counter. Ethan leaned in, watching her every move. "I think the man at table 5 left this," she told the barista, handing the wallet over. "Do you know him?" the barista asked, glancing at the wallet's luxurious design. "No," Lila replied, shaking her head, "but it's better if you hold on to it. He might come back." Ethan couldn't help but smile. She hadn't even opened it to check for money or identification. She had simply done the right thing without hesitation. But something else caught his attention. As she turned away from the counter, Lila suddenly winced, one hand instinctively moving to her belly. She quickly masked the pain, returning to her duties as if nothing had happened. But Ethan had seen enough. A deeper mystery. Ethan waited until the cafe had quieted down before stepping back inside. Lila spotted him immediately and approached with a slightly embarrassed smile. "Forgot something?" she asked, holding up his wallet. "Apparently." He took it from her, pretending to check its contents. "Thank you for being honest." "It's no problem," she said, brushing off the praise. But Ethan wasn't done. "Can I ask you something?" Lila hesitated. "Sure. Why are you working so hard, especially in your condition? Shouldn't you be resting?" Her expression darkened slightly, and for the first time, Ethan saw a hint of vulnerability in her eyes. "Resting doesn't pay the rent," she said quietly. "Is there no one helping you?" Lila's jaw tightened. "That's not really your business." Ethan raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fair enough, but if you ever need help, just say the word." She stared at him for a moment as if trying to figure out his angle. "Thanks," she said finally, though her tone suggested she didn't believe him. As Ethan left the cafe, his mind was racing. Lila was unlike anyone he'd ever met. Fiercely independent, honest to a fault, and clearly carrying more burdens than she let on. He knew he should let it go, leave Ashton Bay behind and return to his world of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, but something about her wouldn't let him. He had no idea that the mystery of Lila's life was about to collide with his in ways he could never have imagined. Ethan Harrington wasn't one to let a curiosity go unanswered. As he drove back to his temporary rental overlooking the ocean, his thoughts kept circling back to Lila. There was something in her eyes, a strength forged by struggle. She reminded him of himself in his younger years, back when he was clawing his way out of poverty and into the life he now led. But there was a difference. Ethan had always known he would succeed, that his hard work would eventually pay off. Lila's world seemed infinitely more precarious. That evening, Ethan found himself scrolling through emails on his laptop, yet his focus kept faltering. Lila's image lingered in his mind, her tired but determined smile, the way she had winced in pain but carried on as if nothing had happened. The memory tugged at him. Against his better judgment, he decided he needed answers. The next morning, he returned to Seaside Haven, his sharp instincts as a businessman urging him to dig deeper. Lila's secret. The cafe was busier than it had been the previous day. Families filled the tables, and the sound of a baby crying mingled with the clatter of dishes. Lila was moving between customers, her movements slower than before, but no less efficient. Ethan waited until she approached his table, balancing a tray of coffee cups. "You're back," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "I'm a man of habits," Ethan replied with a small smile. "Coffee and a croissant, same as yesterday." Lila jotted down the order but hesitated before walking away. "Most tourists don't stick around Ashton Bay for long," she said, her tone almost probing. "Maybe I'm not like most tourists," he countered, watching her reaction carefully. Her lips quirked upward, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. She turned without another word, and Ethan couldn't help but feel like she was trying to keep him at arm's length. As she worked, Ethan noticed more details about her. Lila seemed to know most of the customers by name, offering genuine smiles to an elderly couple in the corner and playfully teasing a teenage boy about his messy table manners. She radiated kindness, but there was a sadness in her that she couldn't quite hide. When she returned with his coffee and croissant, Ethan decided to take a more direct approach. "Lila, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem tired," he said, his tone gentle. She blinked at him, her expression guarded. "That's what happens when you work double shifts 6 days a week." "Double shifts in your condition?" Ethan leaned forward slightly, his concern genuine. Lila sighed, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. "Look, I don't know why you're so interested in me, but I'm fine. I don't need sympathy or help, okay?" Ethan held up his hands defensively. "I didn't mean to offend you. I'm just curious." "Well, don't be." Her tone was sharper now, and she quickly walked away, leaving Ethan to stew in his own thoughts. But her words only fueled his determination. Lila was hiding something, and he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was bigger than she let on. A glimpse behind the curtain. Later that day, Ethan decided to take a walk along the beach near the cafe. The ocean breeze was brisk, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore was oddly soothing. As he strolled, He noticed a small park nearby with a playground and a few benches. To his surprise, he spotted Lila sitting on one of them, her head bowed as she spoke quietly on her phone. Ethan hesitated, not wanting to intrude, but something about the tension in her posture stopped him from walking away. She was gripping her phone tightly, her knuckles white. "No, I told you I'll figure it out," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I don't care what he said. I'm not going back." Ethan's brow furrowed. Who was she talking about? There was a long pause before she continued. "Yes, I'll pay the rent. I just need a little more time. Please, don't do this to me now." She ended the call abruptly, exhaling shakily as she wiped a stray tear from her cheek. Ethan waited a moment before approaching. "Everything okay?" he asked softly, not wanting to startle her. Lila jumped slightly, turning to face him with wide eyes. "What are you doing here?" "I was just taking a walk," he said, gesturing toward the beach. "But you looked upset. I thought maybe you could use someone to talk to." Lila laughed bitterly. "You really don't give up, do you?" "Not when I see someone in pain." For a moment she seemed to consider his words, her defenses wavering. Then she shook her head. "I appreciate the concern, but my problems are my own. You wouldn't understand." "Try me," Ethan said, sitting down beside her. She hesitated, her hands resting on her belly as if seeking comfort. Finally she spoke. "I'm doing this alone," she said quietly. "The baby, the job, everything. There's no one else." "What about the baby's father?" Ethan asked, his tone careful. Lila's jaw tightened. "He left when I told him I was pregnant, said he wasn't ready for the responsibility." Ethan felt a surge of anger on her behalf, but he kept his expression neutral. "That's a lot to handle by yourself." "Tell me about it," she said with a hollow laugh. "But I don't have a choice. I can't fall apart now." Her vulnerability tugged at Ethan in a way he hadn't expected. He wanted to help her, to ease the weight she was carrying, but he knew she wouldn't accept charity. She was too proud for that. Ethan's offer. The next morning, Ethan returned to the cafe with a plan. He waited until the rush had died down before approaching Lila. "I have a proposition for you," he said, sliding into the booth across from her during her break. She gave him a skeptical look. "A proposition? I need someone trustworthy to help with a project I'm working on," he said. "It's not glamorous, but it pays well. Enough to cover a few months of rent at least." Lila frowned, clearly suspicious. "Why me?" "Because I can tell you're honest, and you don't give up no matter how hard things get. That's the kind of person I need." She stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to trust him. "What kind of project?" "I can explain more later," Ethan said, "but it's nothing illegal, if that's what you're worried about." Lila sighed, leaning back in her seat. "I don't know, it sounds too good to be true." "Sometimes good things happen when you least expect them," Ethan said with a small smile. "Just think about it, okay?" Over the next few days, Lila found herself thinking more and more about Ethan's offer. She didn't know much about him, but there was something about his sincerity that she couldn't ignore. And as her bills piled up and her due date loomed closer, she realized she might not have a choice. When she finally agreed to meet Ethan and discuss the details, she was surprised to learn just how serious he was. The project involved organizing a local charity event, something Ethan claimed he wanted to keep low profile. "It's important to me that this stays between us," he said. "I don't want people knowing I'm behind it." Lila agreed, though she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story. As they worked together, she began to see a different side of him, one that was kind, generous, and surprisingly down to earth. And though she tried to keep her guard up, she found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't expected. But just when it seemed like things were finally falling into place, a piece of Ethan's past came crashing into their fragile new world, threatening to destroy everything they had built. Ethan's past had always been an anchor, both in what it taught him and how it weighed him down. As he and Lila began spending more time together working on the charity event, he found himself caught between two conflicting truths. The first was how much he admired her, her perseverance, her integrity, and the warmth she managed to radiate, even while burdened with so much. The second truth was far darker. She reminded him too much of someone he'd lost. It was the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was deep in thought, the way her laughter slipped out unexpectedly and seemed to light up a room. These small, quiet moments were painfully reminiscent of Amelia, his late fiancée. It had been over 5 years since the car crash that had taken her life, but the grief hadn't faded. Ethan hadn't just buried Amelia. He'd buried the vulnerable parts of himself that believed in love, trust, and the idea that people could be more than a transaction. But Lila wasn't a transaction. She was something else entirely. One evening, as they reviewed the guest list for the charity dinner, Lila's voice broke his reverie. "You're quiet tonight," she said, not looking up from the notepad in her hand. "Something on your mind?" Ethan hesitated. "Just thinking about the logistics for the auction. We'll need a backup plan in case the main donor pulls out." Lila glanced at him with a knowing look. "You're lying." Ethan stiffened, caught off guard by her bluntness. "What makes you think that? You're too polished to fumble through small talk. You only do that when you're avoiding something." Ethan's lips twitched into a faint smile despite himself. "Am I really that predictable?" "No," she said softly, setting the notepad down. "But you're carrying something. I can see it. If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. Just don't pretend everything's fine when it's not." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He hadn't expected her to notice, let alone confront him about it. "It's complicated," he admitted finally. "Most things are." Lila's tone was matter-of-fact, but her eyes were kind. For a moment, Ethan considered telling her everything about Amelia, about the guilt that still gnawed at him, but he held back. Lila had enough to deal with, and he wasn't sure he could handle her pity. Instead, he redirected the conversation. "What about you? You've been carrying a lot on your own, too." Lila's expression darkened slightly, and she crossed her arms. "Fair enough. You don't want to talk about your baggage, and I don't want to talk about mine. Let's call it even." Ethan chuckled, the tension between them easing. "Deal." But as the evening wore on, the conversation lingered in his mind. Lila's honesty was disarming, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt the faint stirrings of something he'd thought he'd lost forever: hope. As the charity event drew closer, the complications began piling up. The venue unexpectedly cancelled due to water damage, leaving Ethan and Lila scrambling to find an alternative. The caterer demanded a higher deposit than anticipated, threatening to back out if it wasn't paid by the end of the week. Despite the mounting challenges, Lila proved to be an invaluable partner. She handled last-minute phone calls, negotiated with vendors, and even managed to recruit a few local businesses to donate raffle prizes. Watching her work, Ethan couldn't help but feel impressed. "You're a natural at this," he said one afternoon, as they reviewed the updated event schedule. Lila shrugged. "I've had to learn how to juggle a lot. Survival skill, I guess." Ethan studied her for a moment, his gaze softening. "You're more than just surviving, Lila. You're thriving even if you don't see it." She smiled faintly but didn't respond. Late one evening, after they'd wrapped up another long day of planning, Ethan offered to drive Lila home. She hesitated at first, but the exhaustion in her eyes betrayed her reluctance. "Okay," she said finally, "but just to the corner. I don't want my neighbors getting the wrong idea." Ethan didn't argue, sensing her discomfort. As they drove through the quiet streets of Ashton Bay, Lila stared out the window, her expression distant. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked suddenly. "Doing what?" "The charity event. It's not just about raising money, is it?" Ethan gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "Why do you say that?" "Because people like you don't just show up in small towns like this to play philanthropist. There's more to it." Ethan sighed, debating how much to reveal. "You're right. It's not just about the money. This is personal." Lila turned to face him, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Personal how?" He hesitated, the weight of his past pressing against his chest. "Let's just say it's my way of making amends." "For what?" Ethan glanced at her briefly, before returning his eyes to the road. "For not being able to save someone who mattered to me." The silence that followed was heavy, but Lila didn't push him for more. Instead, she simply said, "I think they'd be proud of what you're doing now." Her words hit Ethan harder than he expected, and he found himself gripping the steering wheel even tighter. When they reached the corner near Lila's apartment, she thanked him quietly and stepped out of the car. Ethan watched as she disappeared into the building, a strange ache settling in his chest. The night of the charity event arrived with a mixture of excitement and nerves. The new venue, a beautifully restored barn on the outskirts of town, had been decorated with twinkling fairy lights and elegant floral arrangements. Guests began arriving in droves, mingling and admiring the silent auction items displayed on long tables. Lila moved through the crowd with a natural grace, checking on volunteers and ensuring everything was running smoothly. Despite the chaos, she looked radiant, her simple black dress accentuating her growing belly. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her. As the evening progressed, Ethan gave a heartfelt speech, thanking the donors and attendees for their generosity. He spoke about the importance of community and resilience, his words carrying an authenticity that resonated deeply with the audience. But as the applause died down and the guests returned to their conversations, Ethan's focus remained on Lila. When the event finally wound down and the last of the guests trickled out, Ethan found her sitting on the edge of the stage, her shoes kicked off and her head tilted back as she closed her eyes. "Tired?" he asked, taking a seat beside her. "Exhausted," she admitted, a small smile playing on her lips. "But it was worth it. We did it." Ethan nodded, his gaze lingering on her. "I couldn't have done it without you." Lila opened her eyes, meeting his. "You could have. You're Ethan Harrington. You probably could have done all of this in your sleep," he chuckled. "Maybe, but it wouldn't have meant as much." For a moment they sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the evening settling over them. Then, almost hesitantly, Ethan reached for her hand. "Lila," he began, his voice soft, "I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing. I don't want to walk away from this, from you." Her breath hitched, her eyes searching his for sincerity. "Ethan, Before she could finish, the barn door creaked open and a tall man stepped inside. He was rugged and unshaven, his clothes rumpled as if he'd been traveling for days. "Lila," the man said, his voice gruff but familiar. "We need to talk." Lila's face went pale, her hand slipping from Ethan's grasp. "What are you doing here, Caleb?" Ethan felt his stomach drop. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just some stranger. As the tension in the room thickened, Ethan realized that whatever bond he and Lila had been building was about to be tested in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing as he tried to piece together what was unfolding in front of him. Caleb's sudden appearance wasn't just unexpected, it was disruptive, threatening to unravel everything Ethan and Lila had been building. Lila's face was a mixture of shock and dread, her posture tense as she took a small step back. "What are you doing here, Caleb?" she repeated, her voice sharper this time. Caleb's gaze flicked from Lila to Ethan and back again. "We need to talk." "Alone," he said firmly, ignoring Ethan's presence entirely. Ethan didn't move. "If it's something that concerns Lila, it concerns me too," he said, his tone steady but firm. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "I don't know who you think you are, but this has nothing to do with you." Lila held up a hand, stepping between them. "Stop, both of you." She turned to Caleb, her voice lowering but still filled with frustration. "You don't get to show up out of nowhere and make demands. Whatever you need to say, you can say it here." Caleb hesitated, his jaw clenching before he finally spoke. "Fine. I heard you were struggling, and I thought I'd come back to help." "Help?" Lila's laugh was bitter, her arms crossing over her chest. "You mean the way you helped when you walked out on me, when you left me to deal with everything alone?" Ethan's fists clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to stay quiet. This wasn't his fight, at least not yet. Caleb ran a hand through his messy hair, clearly uncomfortable. "I know I screwed up, okay? But I've been thinking, and I want to make things right." Lila shook her head, her voice trembling with anger. "You don't get to decide that now. Do you have any idea what I've been through? What I've had to do to keep us afloat?" She motioned to her belly. "This isn't something you can just fix with an apology." Caleb took a step closer, his expression softening. "I'm not asking for forgiveness overnight. I want to be here for the baby, for you." Ethan's heart sank. He'd been prepared for many scenarios, but this wasn't one of them. If Caleb was serious about staying, where did that leave him and Lila? "I don't trust you," Lila said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not after everything." "Then let me earn it back," Caleb pleaded. "Give me a chance, Lila." Lila looked away, her hands trembling as she rubbed her arms. Ethan wanted to step in to shield her from the weight of the decision she was facing, but he knew he couldn't. This was her choice to make. Finally, she turned to Caleb, her expression hardening. "I don't know if I can do that, but I also don't have the energy to deal with this right now." Caleb opened his mouth to argue, but Lila cut him off. "You can stay in town if you want, but don't expect anything from me. I need time." The words hung in the air like a fragile truce. Caleb nodded reluctantly, his shoulders slumping. Okay, I'll wait. With that, he turned and walked out of the barn, leaving Ethan and Lila alone once more. The silence between them was heavy, the weight of the encounter settling over them like a cloud. Lila sank onto the edge of the stage, her head in her hands. Ethan approached her cautiously. Are you okay? She let out a shaky laugh. Not really. Ethan sat down beside her, unsure of what to say. If you need time to figure things out, I understand, he said finally. Lila looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. This is a mess, Ethan. I don't even know where to start. You don't have to figure it out all at once, he said gently, and you don't have to do it alone. Lila's gaze softened, and for the first time that evening she smiled. A small, tentative thing, but it was enough to give Ethan hope. In the days that followed, the tension between Lila, Caleb, and Ethan simmered just beneath the surface. Caleb kept his word, staying out of Lila's way, but his presence in town was a constant reminder of the choices she had to make. Ethan, meanwhile, threw himself into his work, using the distraction to keep his emotions at bay. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop thinking about Lila. One evening, as he was going over plans for another project, there was a knock at his door. When he opened it, Lila was standing there, her face illuminated by the warm glow of the porch light. "Can we talk?" she asked hesitantly. Ethan stepped aside, letting her in. "Of course." Lila sat down on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about Caleb, the baby, and you." Ethan's heart raced, but he kept his expression neutral. And I realized something," she said, meeting his gaze. "I've been so focused on surviving that I haven't allowed myself to think about what I really want. For me, for my child." "What do you want, Lila?" Ethan asked softly. She hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. "I want stability. I want someone I can count on, someone who sees me, not just as a single mom or a waitress, but as a person." Ethan reached for her hand, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. "You deserve that, Lila. You deserve everything." Lila smiled through her tears, her grip on his hand tightening. "I don't know what the future holds, Ethan, but I know I want you in it." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. For the first time in years, he felt the walls around his heart begin to crumble. "I want that too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Over the next few weeks, Lila and Ethan navigated the delicate balance of building a life together. Caleb eventually left town, realizing that his chance to make amends had passed. While it wasn't easy for Lila to let go of her anger and disappointment, she knew it was the right choice, for herself and for her child. As Lila's due date approached, Ethan became a steady presence in her life. He attended doctor's appointments, helped her set up a nursery, and even learned how to cook a few simple meals to take some of the pressure off her. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Lila resting her head on Ethan's shoulder, she looked up at him and smiled. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked. Ethan chuckled. "Not in a million years. I'm glad you left your wallet on that table," she teased. "Me too," he said, kissing her forehead. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy little girl named Amelia Grace, it was a moment of pure joy. As Ethan held the tiny bundle in his arms, he felt a sense of completeness he hadn't known he was missing. Lila watched him with tears in her eyes. "You're going to be an amazing dad," she said softly. Ethan looked at her, his heart full. "And you're already an incredible mom." As they sat together in the hospital room, their daughter cradled between them, Ethan knew that his life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. For the first time in years, he felt whole. And for Lila, the girl who had once been too scared to dream, the future finally felt like a place she wanted to be.